Hopefully, there we go, it's starting. Well, good evening, everybody who is here, and welcome to the fifth and final session for the amalgamation study for the Village of Caroline in Clearwater County. I'm Ian McCormack of Strategic Steps, and before I begin, I'd like to turn this over immediately to the Reeve and to the Mayor just to bring some opening comments. So, Reeve Lougheed, if you'd like to kick us off, that would be great.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. Yes, my name is Daryl Lougheed, and I'm a counselor for Division 3 in Clearwater County, as well as Reeve. And I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to this information session. I know there are a number of my colleagues available here, and we'll probably get a chance to hear and see from them a little bit as well, too. But just ultimately, thank you for coming and listening to residents about the topic of amalgamation. First, just a little bit of background. The government of Alberta has provided us with a grant to study the pros and cons of amalgamation between Clearwater County and the Village of Caroline. Part of that process is to listen to those who would be affected somehow. Tonight is one of our opportunities to listen to residents, businesses, and community organizations and gather the feedback that will help us inform both councils as we go down this road. Strategic Steps is the independent consultant hired to complete the amalgamation study and provide recommendations to both Clearwater County and the Village of Caroline. SSI is an Alberta-based company who have had experience with amalgamations before. They are here to guide the conversation tonight, listen to your comments, and answer questions about the process that is underway. We hired them for their independence and expertise in working with local governments all over Canada and beyond. Public engagement is a big part of completing this study, and I'm pleased to be hosting 4 in-person sessions, and this is the final one of those. We had one in Leslieville, one in Butte, Crammond, and in Caroline. The virtual session is what we're doing tonight, and that's trying to accommodate people who weren't able to come in person. And in addition, there is a survey that anyone is welcome to complete. That will be closing, I believe, tomorrow. So you'll have to access that fairly quickly here as well. But we'd love to hear your comments through that survey as well. It's important to note that no council decisions opposing or supporting amalgamation have been made by Clearwater County or the village. The only motion that has been passed by both councils is to initiate the process of exploring amalgamation. This is required by Alberta's Municipal Government Act. Getting your help in making the decision is what we are doing tonight. Members of the county and village councils who are in attendance tonight are here to listen and to gain perspective. Again, thanks for joining us. I know you're all busy, so we appreciate your time. And with that, I'll hand it over to either Ian or Mayor Rimmer if they have some comments as well.
Sure. Mayor Rimmer?
Yes, thank you, Ian, and thank you, Reeve Lougheed, for that introduction. And I would just like to welcome everyone that is here tonight participating and getting as much information as they can and being able to provide us with information so that we can make proper decisions as we go forward on this process. So again, thank you, and let's get this going.
Let's get it going. Thank you so much, Reeve. Thank you so much, Mayor. And welcome to everybody who's here. I know some of you have been here throughout these sessions as we have moved from place to place to place. There are some of you here on our list of participants who hopefully are joining us for the first time as well. So welcome. What we're going to talk about this evening is kind of listed here. We've already done the introductions and the welcome. There are some other members of the councils here this evening as well, and they may pop in from time to time. I'll present some time talking about how we got to this point. Looking at some of the history, some of the current state, and then some of how we're going to move from here on in. By we, I mean the village and the council, village and the county, of course. We have been gathering questions as we have been going throughout the process, and we will cover some of those. Well, we'll cover all of those frequently asked questions this evening, and then we'll respond to any questions that you might have too. Historically, as we've gone through these sessions, We have covered a lot of similar questions. So hopefully we will probably hear some of those again this evening with a different group of people, and there may be some other questions too. At that point, then we will just gather your input. We have committed to have you done before 8 o'clock or by 8 o'clock. And because we'll see how this goes, because it is a virtual session as well. So what I've already mentioned that the session today is being recorded, and it will be presented or provided on the municipal website. So if you're interested in recomprising what happened this evening or sending the link to somebody else, you're absolutely welcome to. If you want to interject with a question or a comment, please raise your hand if you know how to do that in Zoom, or put a note into the chat in Zoom if you are okay with that. If we fail to get your attention any of those ways, then just please speak up and ask. I'm asking people too to keep yourselves on mute unless you're the one who is speaking. As I look at the list, almost everybody is muted. I'm just going to mute all right now. So everybody now, I believe, is muted, except me. I mentioned a survey as well, or the Reeve made reference to a survey. You can get that survey through the QR code that's on the upper right-hand corner of every slide this evening on the presentation. This slide, the QR code, if you're using your mobile device, will take you to the county's website, to the page that deals with amalgamation. And there are a few files on that page that may be of interest to you, including the frequently asked questions and the survey that the Reeve referenced as well. We've already heard from the introductions. In terms of us, just briefly to reiterate what the Reeve had mentioned, we were retained jointly by the county and the village to work through this amalgamation study process. We were brought in, whenever we work with an organization such as this, we're brought in typically for reasons of independence or expertise or capacity or some version of all of those. In this case, we were brought in because we are the independent experts. We work a lot with local government in Alberta and beyond, mostly in Western Canada, a little in the north, a little in the States, and a little in Australia. So we have seen how local governments operate. We have worked with municipalities that have either gone through an amalgamation, such as the one being proposed here, or through things like a dissolution, which is where one municipality becomes part of another municipality because it's no longer viable. We typically work in local government, so we've worked with a lot of different types of local governments here in Alberta. We also work with other governance boards too, so things like libraries or professional associations or commissions. And yeah, so we'll leave that where we are. So tonight, just a little bit of kind of where we are right now. Some people sometimes have asked, why haven't I heard about this before? And the reason is that this is extremely early in the process. This is the fifth of the same type of open house or drop-in session, if you like, dealing with this study that's the amalgamation. So this is really the first opportunity that anybody has had to listen, to understand, to hear, to have an opinion, and to express that opinion. The way this has worked is that the county and the village were both provided with a grant to fund this study. And so the province has been on side with this as well. That grant has gone in part to cover the cost of bringing us in to do this. As the municipalities consider this process, this is something that is part of informing the council's decisions. Whoops, have I missed somebody there? Oh, the code is hidden under the picture. I didn't know my pictures were there. Hopefully that's better. I didn't know you could see my pictures. Okay, so there we go. The public engagement is actually required by the Municipal Government Act. This is the first round of engagement. Should there be any decision by the councils to proceed to future steps, there would be future rounds of engagement as well. So the minister who is providing this funding has a request that we provide them with information. The council members who are here are in attendance to listen. We have had members of councils, I think members of both village and county council have been at every one of the sessions, so they're hearing as well. And we will be providing a report back to them on what we heard. theming some of the items that are coming up at these sessions as we move throughout the county and in Caroline as well. So really for you who are listening today, this is your opportunity, your first opportunity, if you like, to get informed, to understand what the process is, what the potentials are, and some of the topics that we have run into as we move through this process from time to time. So certainly if you have comments, we're interested in those. If you have questions, we're interested in those as well. So in 2020, so 3 years ago or so, there was another study that was done that you may have heard of. That study actually included 3 partners. It included the village, the county, but the town of Rocky Mountain House was also involved at that point. At the conclusion of that study, when the results were received and looked at by the 3 councils, the town of Rocky chose not to proceed. However, the village and the county were interested in proceeding, which was one of the options in that earlier study. And as such, they went forward with looking more in detail about what amalgamation might look like, or might be on what might be on the table for these 2 municipalities over the next few years. The Reeve referenced a motion or a decision that was made by both councils, and it's the only decision that has been made so far. So on February the 14th, as you see on the screen here, both councils passed the same motion. Both of them said they wanted to consider a motion to direct administration to jointly initiate exploring amalgamation with the other, depending on which municipality the motion was made in. So that's the only decision that's been made, is they're interested in looking at what's happening. So this evening is kind of one of those opportunities for elected officials to listen, and also then to hear from what you have to say as well. So to look at this kind of in a linear way from start to wherever we happen to go, in this case, the historical conversation we have learned has been going on for many years. It's been happening for, some say 30 or 35 years. And so people are not surprised in a lot of cases that the conversation is still going. In 2020, as I made a reference to, there was the study done with 3 partners. The town fell away at that point. The 2 continued, the village and the county continued with a study that started in 2022 and will wrap up here in 2023. The key date was that February 14th motion to explore amalgamation that I referenced on the last slide, which brings us to today. The public engagement is both good practice and required by the Alberta's Municipal Government Act, which is the law that governs how towns, cities, villages, counties in the province are run. So the public engagement is happening here. This is the 5th and final of the public engagement sessions. This won't be the last chance anybody has if the councils decide to move forward, which is the next step. After we provide information to the 2 councils, they have a decision to make. They can either one of them or both of them can decide whether to proceed with starting negotiations. If both councils say, yes, we're interested in negotiating, then the process continues. If one or both councils say they're not interested in starting negotiation, then the process stops and we stay where we are today with the county and the village. That process of starting negotiations is also not the final decision. That is, let's just see if we work together what we can come up with as a potential option for the councils to decide as 2 separate municipalities. At that point, however, if the county and the village choose to negotiate and they come to an agreement, they then have to vote on whether they would like to amalgamate or not. Much like the other decisions, both councils have to vote in favor of asking to amalgamate for the process to continue. If one or both of them vote against deciding to amalgamate, the process stops at that point as well, and we remain where we are today. If the councils do decide together or individually and together to ask the province, tell the province that they would like to amalgamate, then the final decision goes to the government of Alberta. If the request is a yes from the county and the village, the government of Alberta, through the provincial cabinet and the Minister of Municipal Affairs, would consider the request from both the county and the village, and the province ultimately would make the decision about whether they would proceed with whether we can proceed with amalgamation or not. I will say in our experience, if two municipalities come together to the province with this request, it is typically provided, typically granted. The last one that happened in Alberta was the town of Diamond Valley, which is the former town of Turner Valley and the former town of Black Diamond, which amalgamated on January 1st of this year. So this has been a recent occurrence. So if we look at some of the history, this goes back many years. And of particular interest might be that in 1969, the government of Alberta combined a series of what's called improvement districts, or something that is less than a county, together. And that's what became Clearwater County. And so ever since then, for discussions on amalgamation have happened on and off, formally and informally. The difference with Caroline is it's a standalone village and has been for a long time, for a century. And that differs from the other hamlets that are within the county, which were never villages or towns before. So this process wasn't required for any of the other hamlets. So if we bring ourselves from that point around where the discussion started to February of this year, that's where we got to. So this is the first time that any members of the public have been asked their opinion about anything that's going on formally through this process. So what would happen next? After hearing from you, and we have an engagement plan about which types of organizations and groups within the county and the village we ought to be speaking with, the councils have another decision to make. They have to determine whether it's in their interest to continue or not to continue. We know, as do you, that there are lots of issues going on in the village and on the county, and even in the wider world as well. So having a discussion on those is really important. So in order for that discussion to start happening, then we need another decision from the councils to proceed. And that's that motion I mentioned earlier. What isn't happening right now, of course, is negotiating. And when you negotiate with another party, before that negotiation starts, you typically don't tell the other party everything that you're interested in, that you want, that you need, that you like. So that's the stage we are at right now. Neither the county nor the village has provided an offer, if you like, to the other. So right now it's just, should we be having this conversation rather than let's negotiate? The let's negotiate is the next vote. And if that proceeds and the negotiations happen, and both the county and the village think it's a good idea to proceed with amalgamation, then the decision to either support that or to oppose it will have to be made later on after the negotiations have been completed. And that could take some time. Negotiations in some places have taken many, many months or a year or more. And even after that, if the county and the village ask the provincial government for permission to amalgamate, there will be some time where the province considers it as well before they make any announcement. Just as a bit of an example, it was about 2 years between the town of Turner Valley and Black Diamond asking to amalgamate until January 1st of this year when they did amalgamate, because there are a whole lot of things that need to be worked out between whenever the negotiations are complete and whether the amalgamation happens. Which brings us to why we're actually talking about public engagement now. It's that step in the process where the councils are looking for as much information as they can get to make the best decision that they can. We do know, however, that the councils will never have all the information just because it keeps changing a little bit, but they will have enough information to make a good decision on behalf of the ratepayers, the voters, the businesses and community organizations, both in the county and in the village. So to that end, when we developed the engagement plan, we had planned for 4 in-person sessions, and the Reeve pointed out where those had been around the county and in Caroline as well. We're holding the virtual session tonight, which covers the same information. With reference already made to that online survey, which is in the the code is in the upper right-hand corner here. It's also available in hard copy from the village and the county as well, if you prefer hard copy. Our closing date for that is tomorrow, however, once we're finished with these engagement sessions. When we thought about, when the two councils thought about who we ought to engage with, first of all, the two councils set up a committee of 2 members of each council to kind of work through this process rather than asking all members of both councils, although all members have to make the final decision. When they considered who we ought to be speaking with, the groups that they were looking at were these ones. So in addition to asking citizens who live in the county and the village what they thought, we know that there are other organizations who have an interest in this and who may be impacted by a decision to amalgamate, or may be impacted by a decision not to amalgamate as well. So that then gets us to this frequently asked questions. I'm going to go through these. I haven't seen any hands pop up and I haven't seen anything pop up in the chat. So I'm going to proceed. And certainly you're welcome to ask questions either now or a little bit later as well. So these frequently asked questions are available on the websites of the village and the county if you're interested in more information. So these are questions that come up quite frequently. This list of questions was developed by that committee of the 2 councils that was looking at how we work through this amalgamation study process. So the first question typically is the decision made already? And the answer is no, but the reason the question comes up is because for the last 30 years or more, this conversation has been going on. And we have run into some people who have thought the decision had been made, or in fact that the amalgamation had already happened. It hasn't yet. Which blends into that next question about how long the discussion's been going on. And from some of the people who have long memories in the county, we have heard it's been going on since the late 60s. And so it's been going on almost as long as Clearwater County has existed. So you may have heard some of these conversations before. The difference is that now this is happening kind of in an official way because both councils asked to have this conversation. So that's what's happening. There are options, however. We have used the term amalgamate all the time, and that's what the study is looking at. But there are actually different ways that the county or the village could change. And so amalgamation is one of them. What amalgamation means is, under the provincial law, if 2 municipalities or more potentially said, we think we would be stronger together, they can choose to become a single municipality. And as such, then they would have 1 council and 1 set of administrators, and the logos on the side of the heavy equipment would all be the same municipality. So it becomes a decision of both municipalities to self-determine their future. The second is dissolution. And dissolution is about dissolving a municipality. And dissolving a municipality under provincial law means that typically the smaller municipality in population would just dissolve and become part of the larger one. The dissolution usually happens because the smaller municipality is no longer financially sustainable or financially viable. So they recognize that that can be a problem. The way the province runs this is that any municipality that dissolves automatically dissolves into the surrounding municipality. So when this happens, dissolutions of, say, villages or towns would always be into the surrounding county or municipal district, just because they're right next door. In a dissolution, the county or the municipal district, the receiving municipality, really doesn't have much say in it, because it's the only place for that small urban municipality that's no longer sustainable to go. So that's the dissolution. The difference here, of course, is that the people who live in the town or the village really don't have a say in this, whereas they do in amalgamation. The third option is annexation. And annexation is used usually by urban municipalities, cities, towns, villages, if they need more space to expand. So in this case, conceivably, it could be the village saying, we need more room to grow, and we would like to get some land, say, from Clearwater County. And they would go through a process of annexing that land from the county. This is something that happens fairly frequently throughout Alberta in communities that are growing and need more land to make sure that they have a stock of land available for the next 15, 20, or 30 years. So this is not an annexation process we're going through with the village and the town. I will say that there are already some agreements in place between the two, between the village and the town. The province requires an intermunicipal development plan, which talks about how the county and the village deal with development, kind of on the edge of the village as it lines up with the edge of the county. They also require things called an ICF, or an intermunicipal collaboration framework. The province has said that the counties, all municipalities in Alberta have to have agreements with their neighboring municipalities in a range of areas that include things like recreation, for example. There's another thing that's happening too here at the moment, and that is both the county and the village are part of things like what are called regional service commissions, or regional provision. Fire response is a good example of that. So rather than the village of Caroline having its own fire trucks, own and dedicated fire trucks, they can respond to fires that are in the county, and county fire trucks can respond to emergencies that are happening in the village too, through that kind of an agreement, mutual aid agreement. So those are some of the options. Some people have asked what happens to the county and the village. Specifically, if an amalgamation goes ahead, then both municipalities would become a single one. Essentially, what would happen at midnight on one night, you go to bed and you live in the village or the county, and you wake up the next morning and it's whatever the name of the new municipality is. It could just be Clearwater County. For all intents and purposes, nobody takes down the sign to the village of Caroline street sign that says X number of kilometers. Nobody changes the business mix or the residential mix. Nobody changes the street pattern or renames anything like that. The difference you would notice over time is rather than village of Caroline vehicles or Clearwater County vehicles, you would notice the logo on the side would be whatever the new municipality is. You would also notice that in things like property tax notices, where instead of paying property taxes to the county and the village, you would be paying property taxes to whatever the new municipality is called. And it could be called Clearwater County. It could be called something different as well. So for most people, those are the changes that you would notice. Okay. The next one here is about why is Rocky not part of the process? I mentioned that a little while ago. They were originally part of the process. They chose not to continue while the village and the county continued. So they are certainly around, but they're not part of this discussion. The next one, what will the name of the new municipality be? So if the county and the village do choose to amalgamate, what do we call it? One of the questions the province of Alberta asks if a municipality, if an amalgamation is going ahead is, what do you want to call yourselves? You get to choose, or the councils get to choose. It could be Clearwater County, it could be something different. As an example, again, looking back at Diamond Valley, they used to be Turner Valley and Black Diamond as two different towns. They chose the name Diamond Valley just to combine the two of them. It's up to the councils to decide what they want to call themselves. So the name is up to you. Some people have asked about other amalgamations. There haven't been a lot of amalgamations per se. I've already mentioned Diamond Valley a few times. There have, however, been a bunch of dissolutions in the last few years. And those dissolutions, again, are when one municipality becomes part of another one and just kind of dissolves into the other for whatever reason. So some of the examples that are here you may have heard of. So the former town of Grand Cache became part of the municipal district of Greenview. The town of Lac La Biche became part of Lac La Biche County. The town of Granham became part of the municipal district of Willow Creek. And most recently, the village of Wabamun became part of Parkland County. What you notice with all of these, however, is those names probably still mean something to you. Those villages and towns haven't disappeared as cultural centers or business centers or where people go to gather. They have changed politically in terms of their council representation, and they have changed structurally in terms of who's looking after maintaining the streets and sidewalks and snowplows. So these things do happen. Utility bills and other bills like that If they are private utilities, your internet, say, that would not change who you pay that to. When it comes to municipal utilities and property taxes, you would pay those to whatever the name of the new municipality is, if the amalgamation goes ahead. Again, if. And so there would be very little difference. Something we have noticed that happened in Diamond Valley was they were wondering about, a couple of things were mailing addresses and things like driver's licenses or government ID. The mailing addresses have stayed the same in the old Turner Valley and Black Diamond. They will gradually change over time, but the postal codes are going to remain the same anyway. When it comes to things like driver's licenses, what the province of Alberta said in Diamond Valley's case is these driver's licenses will remain valid until you go to renew it next time. So they will expire in the normal course of expiry due dates, and then they will, as they are renewed, they will be updated at that point. Who makes the final decision? The final decision, because local government of all types is governed by the Municipal Government Act in Alberta, the province of Alberta gets the final say on who makes, on whether two municipalities can amalgamate or not. They will look for local support before they do that. And when will it happen? The short answer is it depends. The long answer is, first of all, the two municipalities would have to decide to proceed to negotiation. And however long that takes, it will take. Then the two municipalities, if they come to a point where they agree on the negotiation, they would have to decide to proceed. And if they do decide to proceed, then the decision goes to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And then the minister would decide whether it goes ahead, and if so, when it would happen. There are two types of dates that the province usually picks. One is the date of an election, and our next election in Alberta for local governments is October of 2025. So that's one possibility. Another possibility that the province uses is January 1st, like they did in Diamond Valley this year. So Diamond Valley elected a council that took office on January 1st. They will be re-elected, or there will be another election in 2025 there as well. Sorry, their election was December of 2022, not 2021. So the new council will have a 3-year term. So those things vary a little bit. Will council still have, Caroline still have council reps? They will. However, because Caroline is 500 people, give or take, and the county is 12,500 people, give or take, the representative of Caroline will likely not be just Caroline. Depending on how things are divided up, you want all of the divisions have to have roughly equal numbers of people in them, or voters in them. So there may be some dividing of new divisions that have to happen to keep the same number of people on council, and to have each of those people on council represent about the same number of people. So there will be one or more councillors who have Caroline as part of their division, but there likely won't be a Caroline division councillor just by themselves. And you get to vote on whether to amalgamate or not. That's up to the councils to decide. The way the law is written, the law says the councils can choose to have a vote if they want to, but they don't have to. In some places they have chosen to vote. In other places they have chosen not to vote. So that's up to the councils to decide. And are the councillors able to talk about what's happening? They most certainly can talk about anything that's public, like this process, for example. They can talk about anything that's already in what's called the public realm, or anything that has been discussed in open session. So what happens in a council meeting, for example. I'm sure you would appreciate too that they are governed by Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy legislation, or FOIP, in Alberta. So there are some things they can't talk about. And those break down into kind of 3 big buckets. One is land, labor, and legal. And you can probably understand, if you're involved in business or even in your own home lives, that if you are going to negotiate, you want to negotiate behind closed doors, or at least not show all your cards at the very beginning. So those are the sorts of things that members of council can't really talk about. However, every decision that a local government makes, whether it's the county or the village, has to be made in public. So the ultimate decisions will happen in public. What happens leading up to those decisions sometimes will be made by the councils individually or collectively behind closed doors so that they maintain, they stay in line with the law, the FOIP law. The members of council also are bound by their own code of conduct, how they may and may not behave. So they can't speak outside of their council, outside their council colleagues, without their council colleagues knowing. And part of that code of conduct says they must keep confidential information confidential. If they don't do that, or if they do tell people things that are supposed to be confidential, there can be consequences for those members of council as well. So they don't do that. If the decision not to amalgamate happens, we essentially revert to the way things are right now with the county and the village. So that decision could stop at two or three more points. The next decision, again, for the councils, both of them, is to decide whether they want to formally negotiate. If they say yes, then it proceeds. And then the next question is, if the negotiations are successful, both councils would be asked, would you like to negotiate? Sorry, would you like to amalgamate? And if their response to that is both councils saying yes, then that proceeds further. If one or both councils vote no, the decision falls by the wayside and we go back to the way things are right now. The issue with that, of course, is some of the financial sustainability of the village. And right now, the village members of village council can speak with members of county council and work together to self-determine what they want to have happen. If the amalgamation doesn't go ahead, then we are a few years further down the road if this conversation happens again, and we don't know exactly what the circumstances would be at that point. Another question we've gotten is about social media, and where do you get good information from? I've made reference to the county's website, and I've made reference to the village's website. Both of them contain as much information as possible, including this list of questions and the survey, some historical press releases and old reports as well. So those are decisions that have been made. You can get access to that page again through the QR code in the upper right-hand corner of every one of these slides. I would encourage you to be sure that the source of your information is a good one, rather than just hearsay, because we have seen in other municipalities that has caused some problems, some longer-term problems. So make sure the information that you're getting is accurate. You're always welcome. I should mention too that you're welcome to contact your county or village councillor and ask them for information or where you can get information. I think the last question we've got here is about debt and revenue. The question has frequently come up about the village and said, if the village and the county become one, what happens to revenue and expenses and assets and liabilities? What would happen if the councils choose to amalgamate, and if that proceeds, is everything comes together. So the county's assets and the village's assets become one. The county's assets, county liabilities, and the village's liabilities become one. So just to give you an idea about things like long-term debt, the numbers on this particular slide came from both the Alberta Municipal Affairs and also from the audited financial statements of both the village and the county. All of this data is publicly available if you're interested to look for it. The Clearwater financial statements and budgets are available obviously on the county website. The Caroline financial statements and budget are available on the Caroline website. And the other data is available on the Municipal Affairs website. In this case, the response here is that the province of Alberta tells municipalities that they can have debt up to 1.5 times their annual operating budget. There's some nuance to that too. And that's called their debt ceiling or debt limit. Clearwater County is only using 1.5% of that debt limit. So you can see that they're really quite low on what they could borrow. So they have $1.59 million in long-term debt, which includes both the principal and interest. The village of Caroline is also quite low at 10.4% of their debt limit. So they still have a lot of room there too. They have long-term debt outstanding of $198,000, which is both principal and interest. Sometimes people are interested in how much money the town and village bring in and how much they send out. Looking at, again, financial statements and municipal affairs figures, the county's revenue they bring in is about $5,600 per person, while they spend about $4,800 per person. The village is slightly lower in both cases. They bring in about $3,800, and they send out about $3,200. So you can see they're not significantly far apart when you look at this on a person by person basis. I will say, I'm just going to quickly go, there was a note here that somebody had sent to me. He said, did the village of Mirror not dissolve and become a hamlet in the county of Lacombe? That is a near location for Clearwater County. That is true. The village of Mirror, which is just north of Alex, did dissolve into the county. And I don't know if it's the county of Lacombe or the county of Red Deer. You could well be right, but it did choose to dissolve. There are some, while we're on this, there are some villages that have chosen not to dissolve into their surrounding municipality. I think the village of Daysland is one of those, which had a vote of citizens, and the citizens voted against dissolution. So they remain as they are. So not all dissolutions go through. Hopefully that helps. It was County Lacombe. Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. So that covers our frequently asked questions. That's kind of where the county and the village are at the moment. We know, however, that as the county and the village look ahead, there are going to be some costs associated with amalgamation if they proceed. So there are big issues and there are small issues that they need to hammer out. So this is where that negotiation happens. And even after negotiation, if there's a decision made to amalgamate, some of these things have to happen, would still have to happen as well. So little things like signs and logos and letterhead. I would say right here too, though, that the signs that point to Caroline stay, that they would remain the way they are. Another big one would be around services and the levels of services. That's a big piece of where the cost of running a local government is. So for example, the village may say in our parks, we cut grass when it's 2 inches high. The county may say we cut grass when it's 3 inches high. And of course, that means the county has fewer cuttings for a year. So the costs are a little bit different. Those are the sorts of things that need to be hammered out. They're called service levels. And I mentioned parks, but it happens across all types of service. We look at staffing costs, and people think sometimes, well, are we going to see fewer staff? The people who need services, whether it's people who need the gravel, or whether they need agricultural gravel, like gravel grading, whether there's agricultural foremen, or whether it's somebody putting on programs, the same number of people still require the same number of service. So it's likely not going to be a lot of staffing differences at the front end of service delivery. Where staffing differences might or would happen is higher up in the organization, where you don't need multiples of some of the roles that exist in the county office or in the village office. We also know that there are costs around long-term maintenance. The county, of course, has lots of culverts and bridges and roads. The village has sidewalks and sewers and roads as well. All of those are called assets, and all of those have a natural lifespan and need to be replaced from time to time and maintained in between. Depending on the age and condition of those roads, culverts, sidewalks, etc., there will be costs in maintaining or upgrading those. And sometimes there are grants available for that, and sometimes there aren't. But relying on grants for that is likely not the best choice of action. The other question about cost that frequently comes up is taxes. Will my taxes go down because of the amalgamation? Well, the big dependent on that is the level and type of services that get offered. That there may be some savings because of what's called economies of scale, or we don't need as many people to provide service, or as many pieces of equipment to provide service. But chances are that's not going to be a significant change. We are seeing a lot of inflation recently, and that affects the county and the village just the same way it affects you as a person. So costs are rising quite significantly. What might happen is if taxes don't go down, it might prevent taxes from going up quite so fast. Oftentimes, there are also provincial grants available during this transition period as two municipalities become one to sort out some of these things that they're trying to sort out. So it's hard to predict, but ultimately council gets to decide on taxes. and sometimes we have grant funding. Okay. So this is where we kind of turn the tables back to you, and you may well have comments or questions, and we're more than happy to respond as we are able. This process is really about gathering the questions, answering where we can, but knowing that there's a lot of information we still need to find so we can provide good information to both councils so that they are in the position to make the next decision that they want to say. In terms of next steps, then, the survey is still available. This frequently asked questions that we've just gone through is available through the QR code or on the websites. I know the county newsletter and website are updated. There are social media posts that happen from time to time. The comment here is, again, just to be careful of that rumor mill. And finally, and the next slide has this too. If you have questions that don't get answered tonight or you think of later, contact info@strategic steps, and that will get to us, and we can provide answers that you might have. So that kind of covers what we had hoped to cover for you in terms of the presentation part of this. I am quite happy to try and respond as well as possible to questions that you might have. I would say if you have comments as well, I'm happy to listen to those as well. There are some elected officials here on listening as well, and they may be interested too. So if anybody here, we have about 19 people online, it says. If any of you want to unmute yourselves or just ask a question, you're welcome to. If you've had enough of us all, you're welcome to go about your evening as well. We'll stay and respond to questions, so if you have any.
Ian,
Yes.
if the end result is the same and Caroline becomes a hamlet, why do we go through the steps and add increased costs, and therefore spend tax dollars that may not be necessary to get to the same result?
That's a question. That's almost a political question for the councillors. We will probably include that question as part of what we do. I would say, however, that the biggest difference, if you like, Marion, between dissolution is what you're referring to, which could potentially happen some years hence, and amalgamation, which is what's being considered right now, is the issue of self-determination. That right now, the village and the county essentially, as far as structure goes, go in as equals to discuss how best they can serve the needs of their citizens, their businesses and organizations. If and when it came to dissolution some years down the road, both the village and the county would likely lose control over that. So in terms of timing, that's why now rather than wait later. As for cost, one of the things that's likely to wait if the decision not to proceed happens, and the village is unable to increase the funding it would put towards infrastructure maintenance or replacement, that infrastructure is going to get X number of years older before it gets maintained through the process of a dissolution rather than through the process of an amalgamation. So those are a couple of reasons.
What I'm really getting to is the end of the game. It will become the hamlet of Caroline, regardless of whether there's amalgamation or there's immediate dissolution, and then it still becomes part of the county anyway.
Potentially, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay, we've dropped a couple of people here. Does anybody else have questions? I don't see her question.
Yes, Ian.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just a question related with if amalgamation does occur.
You're breaking up and I'm having a really hard time hearing what you say. I heard you say if amalgamation does occur.
Has dissolved or strike, and then you amalgamate. Yeah,
So
if
I- I'm so-
sure
I'm not catching your question. Is there any way you could write it?
first, and then you amalgamate, right?
I missed most of your question. It was pretty garbled.
Oh, no,
Could you, if you wrote it in the, could you write it in the chat and I'll respond? Even just an outline?
I can try.
Okay. While that's happening, does anybody else have any other questions? There's a question here that says, was it the most recent council who decided to begin the process? If so, which date did the council meeting take place? So the council would have been elected in 2021. So it would not have been this council that chose the start, because the first round of this process began with the 3 municipalities. And so that was in 2020, which was the last term. So I can't comment on that. The decision to proceed this way would have been part of council meeting minutes. I can't comment on specific dates. This council, however, I think, chose to proceed with the 2022-2023 study, the one we're currently in. So that decision would have been made to apply for a grant to do that. And I don't have the number in front of me, but I suspect it would have been probably in 2022, late 21, early 22. That's a guess on my part. If anybody knows better than that and wants to put it in the chat for that, that'd be great. The Marianne's question here is, if amalgamation were to occur, each jurisdiction has to dissolve first, right? Technically, that's correct, but the dissolution is between 11:59 p.m. and 12 a.m. So the 2 municipalities do in fact dissolve to become a single new municipality. It's instantaneous. So the way that municipalities are structured in Alberta is through provincial legislation, provincial law. And the provincial law would be signed by a minister that says, as of midnight tonight, Clearwater County and the village of Caroline are combined and become whatever the new name happens to be. So conceivably, mathematically, the 2 would have to dissolve before whatever the new place is gets its name, or sorry, becomes into existence. That's what happened in Diamond Valley, for example. At the strike of midnight on January 1st, 2023, they became Diamond Valley. At 11:59 p.m., they were 2 different municipalities, 2 different towns. So yes, I guess in terms of technically, they would dissolve and then instantly they would be recombined. They would be combined as a new municipality. Another question here. What's the most economic way to go about this, as we, the taxpayers, are stretched to the limit with excessive food, gasoline, utility prices, etc.? This is one of those questions again about self-determination. That this is a play that through this process, the town, the village, and the county have an opportunity to negotiate with one another to determine what they ought to be offering in terms of services and programs, maybe what they don't have to offer in terms of services and programs, and the level of services and programs they get to offer. So in that way, there you get some efficiency through this process of self-determination that you may not get through a dissolution process. So this probably is the most economic way to do it right now. And I realize there's only one taxpayer. Right now, this study is being funded through a grant, much like the 2021 was. I also made reference to some transitional funding that sometimes comes in as 2 municipalities become one as well. Because it's a grant, I'm never one to say it's for sure, but that sometimes happens as well. I think that's it. I don't have any more questions showing up in my chat.
I would like to ask a question if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So say the amalgamation or dissolution is already done. When this has happened in the past, what does that usually do for property taxes and tax levels throughout the rest of the community? How does it compare as opposed to what it is now? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I understand that's a question that always comes up, and it was kind of covered in one of the FAQs. But ultimately, it's council that decides on tax levels, and tax levels are based on the services and programs that get offered. And one of the other pieces that's a big one at the moment is asset management or maintenance of infrastructure. Sewers are expensive, roads are expensive, bridges are expensive, all those sorts of things carry long-term debt to them. What seems to have happened? First of all, I'm using the big if here. If the decision to amalgamate was made, and if the amalgamation proceeded, you would be putting an extra 500 people into a county of 12,500. So you're looking at a relatively small percentage of the urban people, the Village of Caroline people becoming part of whatever the new municipality is called. So there wouldn't be that much of a ripple effect throughout the county. So I certainly can't put words in the mouths of elected officials who decide this, but I don't see a ton of change on property tax levels. People mentioned earlier that people have to say, well, if we're combining, then aren't property taxes going down? What often happens is it means they don't go up quite as fast. But that's to be determined by the councils as well, which is why I'm a little bit nervous about even saying that. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Somebody points out here that grants are funded by taxpayer dollars, which is absolutely correct. It's that there is one taxpayer. My contact information is on this slide. You also have access to your own elected officials as well. And if you think of things after today that you are interested in knowing about, or questions that you might have, feel free to reach out to me or to your member of your county council or your village council as well as they move through this process. The next steps, as recorded earlier, are after this engagement is happening, is to present information to both councils so that they can make the best decision necessary as they look towards their next step. Their next step, if they choose to consider it, is whether or not they want to move forward with some sort of negotiation. There's no decision made at that point. As the Reeve mentioned right off the top, no decisions about amalgamation have yet been made. So with that, and not hearing any other questions, I will stop the recording and say good night. And thank you so much. Hopefully you've been able to get something out of this session. Some of you have been at other sessions as well, and hopefully that's been useful for you too. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would say good night and enjoy the rest of your evening. So good night from here.